Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome back to another captivating episode of the Love People Technology Learning podcast. And I'm your energetic host, Tamara Kocharova, CEO of Lanes AI, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join us once again for an electrifying dive into thought-provoking conversations. Each episode is an expedition into the depths of discovery where we uncover treasures of wisdom and embark on riveting narratives.
I think in all these different businesses, you mentioned healthcare, right? Or accounting, legal, or manufacturing, is learning the jargon. I always try to talk like them. So one of my key questions when I meet with a client initially before a training is, what are the kinds of words that your organization uses so I can talk like that too? So for example, I worked with a library and they said, don't use the term customer. We call them patrons. So I did, right? Because then it's more seamless and it's not distracting to these participants and these learners.
I'm thinking a lot about Gen Z, but I think my kiddos, they are not Gen Z. Yeah, because my eldest, he is post-pandemic. My small one, he's post-pandemic person. I don't know what kind of generation is it.
I know babies that were born during the pandemic, they were calling pandies.
Oh, pandies, yes.
But we'll see what name sticks, right?
Yes,
as the generations grow older.
Yes.
So, we have them practice and get a baseline, and then we teach them skills, and then they're practicing again, and they get feedback, and then they do it again. And by the end of the day, they see their progress, you see their progress. It's this really immediate reward.
Oh my God, yes, our listeners can't see your smile, but I see your smile and eyes when you are speaking about something which you really love. And yes, I see it like an art. Yes. Today, my amazing guest is Diana Howles. Diana Howles is a luminary in her field, an award-winning speaker, global virtual facilitator, acclaimed author, and master training, boasting 25 years of experience in the learning industry. A virtuosa in virtual and hybrid training, Diana has crafted and delivered live online, hybrid, and blended learning programs for organizations spanning over a dozen countries since 2000. Currently, Diana serves as CEO and co-owner of Howles Associations, LLC. Her articles on learning have graced the pages of esteemed publications, and her latest book, Next Level Virtual Training, Advanced Your Facilitation, has garnered acclaim, winning 3 prestigious Business Book Awards. Sounds super interesting, right? Today, we stand on the precipice of an exhilarating adventure poised to explore a myriad of topics that promise to make this episode an enriching and thrilling experience for all. Guided by Diana Howles, we delve into the expansive realm of modern education and its profound significance. So, dear listeners, buckle up, grab your favorite cup of coffee or tea, and let's dive into some heart-to-heart chats that will leave you feeling inspired and motivated. Welcome to our show. I love it that your specialization includes virtual training and hybrid formats. Let's talk about this, and I really would like to ask you everything about this. That is so interesting and inspiring. For me, creating effective virtual learning experience seems like a multi-phased endeavor. What key roles do you believe are indispensable in crafting engaging and impactful virtual training programs? Share with us your thoughts.
Oh, there's so much that goes into that in virtual training, but we can just kind of hit maybe the tip here. I would say, a key part of it too is learning experience design, which has really gotten a lot of traction over recent years. But it's really being able, again, to me, it's important to see impact in the end. So building engaging virtual learning, meaningful virtual learning. And because we're dealing with adult learners in the training and government and nonprofits and all of those clients that we may work with, make sure it's relevant to them, right? So doing kind of that research. But I really believe that learning experience design kind of builds on the core principles of traditional instructional design, but design is so important to virtual training. And there's so many other elements too, but really designing it for being able to leverage the tools in whatever platform you use. If you use Lanes, right, which has so many affordances for you with breakout rooms and role playing and tracking statistics and all of those wonderful things, but really creating learning activities that allow people to practice what they're learning, again, get feedback, see improvement, really breaking down skills. So there's like bite-sized practice things that they can do, and then process time too. So I'm going to really hone in on design here. A lot of times reflection is left out. And remember, that's a big part of learning. So giving learners and participants the space to kind of breathe and digest and process, even develop like an action plan, whatever it is the topic is that they're learning about, building in reflection in your design as well.
Yeah, so like you told so great thoughts about experience and about reflection, which we have to have in our training, like in our learning design. And for me, it's so interesting. Maybe I'm mistaken. I'm not sure, and I want to talk to you about that. I know that in-person learning design is so really important practice and experience and different kind of learning activities like role-playing games, like, I don't know, brainstorming, like moderation, like case study, different kinds of exercise where you have some cases from the business and we need to discuss it and everything.
Yes.
But in virtual, when I see some kind of trainings, unfortunately, I saw it like in Zoom or Microsoft Teams. It not depends on the like some kind of tool, but like I saw that it's most of them like a lecture, presentation, and presentation.
Yes.
Like in virtual, I don't know why people like jump from in-person trainings to virtual. They started to do something like just a lecture, but it's not training. What do you think about that? Is it like we are on the same page and you saw the same things? And what do you think? Why? And maybe it's okay. Like, say it, please.
It's a wonderful question. So it is the most common error that we saw even pre-pandemic. So I've been doing virtual training since 2000. So even then we saw some of that. So what the temptation is, right? If you have this 6-hour course in person and then you're told to go virtual, the person mistakenly thinks, oh, I'll just move that all online and do the same thing I did for 6 hours. But in the virtual capacity, right, we can really only use a couple hours here or there because it's so exhausting to be on that screen. So it's better to actually have a blended learning approach. And blended learning, by the way, over and over and over again, the research has shown how much more effective that is. So you think very carefully, again, this is design, right, Tamara? So you think very carefully about what could be outsourced to asynchronous activities. What lends itself to doing something outside of the virtual training space? For example, if it is a lecture, is that something I can watch on a video before I come to virtual training? Or if it's an article and we're going to discuss it when we're together online, send the article as pre-work ahead of time. And then in the program, maybe there's pre-work to do, and then you come together for maybe a 90-minute or a 2-hour session together, and you leverage the time together for activities that really promote being together. So the live Q&A, the maybe reflection, working on breakouts, role plays, practicing, discussions, all those things that you need to do when you're together, collaboration, maybe doing group projects and collaborating. And then maybe you go away, right, and do more asynchronous activities, come together again for another live training class. So really this idea of spaced out blended learning where we pair together asynchronous activities offline with this synchronous live time is better for learning, better for learners, and better for engagement.
Oh my God. Yes, I love it. And I wanna, that's our listeners will listen it and to implement, because for me, it's like a pain, like, oh my God, yes. Why the lecture? Why I need to spend my time near the screen, like 1-2 hours when we are not speaking, when we are not sharing our ideas, when we are not work together, when we no, it's a great. Yes. And I love it.
Yeah, so something to really think about in virtual training is inviting your participants to be, in a way, in a sense, co-creators. So think about giving them more agency. For example, if you put them in a breakout group and you give them a good activity that allows them to solve a challenge, for example, that those work great in breakouts. You could even give them options. So you can choose scenario A or you can choose scenario B. You decide. And do you see that choice? Now I get agency because we as a group get to decide we're going to do A or B. So, as many options and decisions you can give to your audience, the more naturally and organically engaging that's going to be, because now I'm more of a coactive, right, creator.
Yes, yes, great. I love it. And like I'm sure that's the people, your learners who involved in your programs, they're like in the best way in facilitator and like in facilitating training, like everything. Yes, I'm really sure. And it's so interesting for me because you mentioned that you are in virtual trainings, not just from the pandemic. You was before,
Yes.
many years, many
Yes.
years ago. And what's the difference you see now? Because like you saw it like, 15 years ago and you see it
Mhm.
now.
One thing that has not changed, Tamara, is people forgetting to unmute themselves. That was true then, and it is still true today, which tells
Yes.
me it will probably always be that way unless the virtual training programs platforms continue to get better and better, like Lane's and all of the other ones, as they should. And so we'll probably maybe have a really obvious way to remind us of how to unmute ourselves. But that has always been the case.
it's
But yeah.
why it's why in lanes we like a facilitator can unmute
Yes.
our listeners.
That's
Like it's
good. That's good. See, good design
but like
there
yes,
because
I know. It's true. It's true. You
it's true. But
unmute. You unmute.
yeah. But some of the things that are different is, some of those platforms aren't even around anymore. But the bandwidth wasn't good back then, right? So we would have this little postage stamp video up in the left-hand corner. We would just turn it on at the beginning of training to say hello because, people, they're curious about, I wonder what this trainer looks like. I wonder where they're situated. I wonder what their view is. I wonder what building they're in. I wonder what city they're in. And, subconsciously, they can be distracted by that. It's like when you read a book and you kind of picture what you think these characters look like. So when you answer that question, you turn on your video and you say, here's my office. This is where I'm sitting. This is my view. Hi, I'm whatever. And then they go, oh, okay, that's who you are and where you are. And then they stop thinking about that. And why is that important? Because now where's your focus? On the learning, on
Wow.
the content, on the training. But anyway, so we could only turn it on for a little bit because it was really not very good quality. And then back then too, you could do computer audio, but it was not good quality. So we used the phone for our audio. We called it an audio bridge. And then we had the internet was the visual. So we were on the phone with the audio and then use the internet for the platform. So what would happen sometimes is people would have back then, they could put somebody on hold on their phone and it would play music in the background, or we called it Muzak. And so what would happen is in your virtual training session, somebody put themselves on mute and everyone would hear music, which was something that thankfully we don't have that issue anymore. But it was nice if your internet went down, you still had the audio connection because, you're using the audio bridge.
Yes.
And we did have breakouts back then. It's hard for people to believe, but we actually facilitated breakouts, but they were audio breakouts. So remember, we were on the phone. So what we were able to do in some of those platforms back in 2000 and 2001 is we would have participants, we'd have to group them up and say, Aaron, Sue, John, you're in group 1, Ria, Tamara, and Stephen, you're in group 2. And then you would have a code you would punch into your phone, #, and you'd go into an audio breakout room by yourselves and then bring you back with a broadcast message, which that tool is still on platforms today, bringing you back, but it was text, right? And then they would hit like a different code on their phone and a # and we'd all come back to the main audio room. So it's really fun to see the affordances today and the evolution today. And it just continues to get better and better.
Yes, I love it. And it's so interesting. I think like our listeners will be so excited to listen it about like how did it work and like how does it work now? And like people sometimes talking about like, oh, I don't like this one. Okay, go back so many years ago. Check
Right. Yes,
how
I
did it
know.
work. Yes. It's like it's how technology develop our industry and make our industry better and better. Yes, you are right.
Yes. And back then too, we always had these tools. Somebody must have decided, let's put this in. It was you could click a button if somebody was talking too slow, or click a button if somebody was talking too fast, but nobody ever used them. And
Yes.
unless the facilitator said to the class, please let me know if I'm talking too fast, nobody used them. But I've noticed, I was waiting for them to go away, and I think they have now finally gone away because they just weren't being utilized. So yeah, it's exciting to see where we're headed.
Yes. And now I want to talk to you about like another part of your experience. You mentioned that you love public speaking training, and as a frequent speaker at events and conferences, how do you prepare for public speaking engagements, and what do you consider the key to delivering a successful presentation? Like share maybe some tips and techniques for engaging and captivating your audience, because I love it. I was twice, I think, in Training Magazine conference in Orlando, and yes, and you are really so brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much. I remember you in the front row, Tamara.
Yes.
For one of those. I really enjoy the experience. So there are lots of things that I do, but I can share a few. And one of them is I remember it's about the audience. Like so many times I think presenters get nervous because they feel like I'm on stage, people are watching me. What if they don't like what I have to say? What if I make a mistake? And when you look at all those comments in your head, it's all about you. The focus is on you. But really, it's about, right, sharing your message or influencing a group or giving them tips so they can improve something, whatever it is. It's about them. So I always try to keep that focus in mind all the time. I like to get to my sessions really early just to set up, but also as people start to come in, kind of meet with them and talk with them and say, well, what are you doing? Let's say if your topic is on virtual training or hybrid training, you could say, what are you doing at your organization? And they talk to you a little bit and you learn more from them, and you learn their names, and then you go meet somebody else. And this is before you've started. It helps you settle down too, right? It can calm the nerves because you're starting to interact with people, but also you're meeting people and you're learning things. And then what's great is you can customize that and kind of weave it into your presentation. And you could say, Joe and I were talking before this session. Joe's going to sit up a lot straighter right then because you thought of his name, right? And then other people you talk to, they're going to sit up straighter too. It's kind of like an engagement technique too. But you're including them in part of the presentation. You're weaving them in, right? And the same thing when people make comments, like if you can get their name, what was your name again? And then later, if there's a time to reinforce that, you could say, now remember when Josephine offered blah, blah, blah. So do you see how it becomes kind of this experience? And I always think about my audiences as one. I think of them as a group of one. So it's like a conversation. There's this group of one and there's me, and just having this shared experience. And then the last thing, Tamara, that I like to do is I tell myself right before we begin, this is going to be fun. And then it usually is.
Yes.
Those are some of the things that I like to do. And I'm sure you and our listeners have things you like to do too.
Oh my God. Diana, it's like now I remember I think it was 2007. It was my second, I think, experience internal. I was a facilitator in the Worldwide Bank.
Wow.
And yes, and I remember it was onboarding program for new employees. Like in my class it was unbelievable, near like 40 participants, and you needed to do it not just a lecture about like products, business processes, and of course I need to engage them to the program. And it was so interesting because it was a small room, and it was like 3 lines of chairs and like 10, 10, 10, 10, I don't know, 3 or 4 lines. And always I remember that, in the backside seat, like not good listeners. They are always to do something together. Like they talk to together, they to do something, but not listening. And of course, it was my strategy. I knew everybody like in the end of the class. I
Mm-hmm.
knew the names and like where they're from and what did they do. And they was so thrilled and excited about them. And after my training, they asked me, Tamara, how do you remember our names? How do you do it? Like, how do you, like always you ask the question and ask me or him or her or
Yes.
something. And like it was a strategy because like
Yes.
it's really important. Second story, it's a small story about my friend. One day she told, when I come to the lunch or dinner or breakfast
Mm-hmm.
with my new customer or like new, I don't know, maybe new friend, new people around, like I don't know, neighbors maybe,
Sure.
I ordered the same food like my
Oh,
partner.
yeah.
Why? Because I want to know more about my partner and I will be on the same page with him or her and I can understand him or her more deeply.
Wow.
And it's interesting. I think
Yeah.
you talked about this the same way, like because
Mm-hmm.
our audience, our learners, if we
Mm-hmm.
know more and deeply like implemented them to our learning processes, it's a brilliant, it's like a great
Yeah.
result.
I love that. And the power of the name, right? Like there's no word that we hear more in our lives than our own name. And so we will immediately sit up a little straighter when somebody says our name. So what's great about virtual training and even hybrid training, if you are facilitating remotely, is that you can have this off-camera area where you have a notebook and a pen because there's so much digital going on. Sometimes I like to just have paper next to me. And if somebody makes a really insightful comment, I'll write down their name. Just, they can't see that. And then maybe a little phrase about what they said so I could reference it later and I remember it because there's so much going on, right? We can't tax our cognitive abilities too much. So just write it down. Or if you need to take little notes on some of the names too. So you remember how to pronounce them, for example. We're a global world. We're continuing to see more global participants. And it's important to say people's names correctly. So you could write little notes to yourself about how to say their name, but just making sure we get it right. Yeah.
Yes, great tips. I think I didn't think about this like this way, that you can write something
Yeah.
like some notes, but in
Yeah.
real life
Nobody can
it's
see.
great and I love it.
Yeah, I facilitated a class it was several Asian countries. It was during the night. So for me, it was nighttime. For them, it was daytime. And we had like a tea break in the middle for them. And I think that was like between midnight and 2 a.m. for me.
Yes.
But so my moderator and I were on during the night, right? But that one, I feel like I'm trying to think. We had Japan. We had a lot of participants from Japan in that class. So what I had done is I had found a school that had a Japanese teacher here in the States where I am, and I gave her a list of my roster, and she recorded for me how to pronounce all of those Japanese names. So I had
Mhm.
notes on that, and I could practice those names. And then when it came time to call on those individuals, it just kind of was able to roll out naturally. And for them, it was not distracting, right? And so there's
Yes.
like little efforts and things we can do to really make that a welcoming experience for all of our participants.
Yes. And I appreciate all the people who ask the correct name pronunciation because it's really important for us, because our name is our power. Like
Yeah.
it's a real some power. And yes, I appreciate that you sharing it. It's really important. Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
if we have really like different world and people all over the world, and like, yes, great. And Diana, let's talk about the concept of like blended and hybrid learning. You
Yes.
mentioned it, and I'm really intrigued by it. And can you paint a picture of what this looks like in action and how it is revolutionized the traditional training landscape? Share, please.
Sure. So hybrid training, I like to call it live mixed learning because hybrid is really used a lot in so many different things. Hybrid cars, hybrid systems, hybrid workplace, right? I feel like that term is really overused, but it is probably what people call it the most, right? So just to clarify for our listeners, hybrid training is this combination of on-site and online learners and or facilitators in a shared learning space. So I really challenge people to stop maybe or consider not using the word room anymore, that four-walled room. Sure, we do still do some in-person training, but it really isn't a four-walled room anymore. It's a shared collaborative learning space, which, right, can include anywhere in the world. But in this hybrid training environment, it can be, I'm here to tell you, it can be successfully executed. It can be smooth, but there's a lot of things we do on the back end and the front end to ensure that that happens. So I liken virtual training preparation and hybrid training preparation to an iceberg. And what I mean by that is like what you see above the water is what the participants see. That's kind of their overall experience. And it's this little tip, right? But under the water, what they can't see is this huge iceberg. And that's all the prep we do ahead of time so that they can have a good experience. So a lot of that in hybrid training has to do with how do we set up the room? How do we make sure we have excellent audio? I like to advise, one of my principles for hybrid training is to work with co-facilitators. In other words, you have one instructor who's the lead, and they can be either in the online venue or the in-person venue, but they're the lead, and then you have a co-facilitator in the opposite venue. And that way, almost every participant, regardless of where they are, has an anchor. It feels like they have an anchor with them in their venue and they don't feel alone.
Yes, it was like, I felt this question on my mind. I want to ask you about the biggest challenges, because like for me, hybrid learning, I think, and you can agree with me and maybe our audience listeners too, that's like more challenging learning format is hybrid. It's like totally. And like, I
Yes.
want to ask you about like different kind of like maybe two highest like challenges which we have like a facilitators, and maybe you have some tips. You told some tips about like two facilitators together. Yes, maybe another one. What kind of challenges we have in hybrid learning, and like maybe your personal tips which you use.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, I like to call it live mixed learning or hybrid learning, same thing. And so, you have double the challenges, maybe even triple the challenges, because you have the in-room participants and then you have the people that are online, right? So, different venues. So, definitely it helps to have co-facilitators. But also, we do a lot of tech practice ahead of time. And making sure you have backup plans that you can use for both of those. But what I like to do, and what has worked really well for me, is I will do breakout rooms. But what I will do is I will just let the on-site folks be together on site. And then I will put everyone who's online in a remote breakout. So, usually we'll do, let's say online, we'll do breakout rooms 1, 2, and 3. Those are all remote. And then in room, we'll say over here, you guys are breakout 4 and you're breakout 5. And then you guys spread out in the room, you guys are online, and then I'll bring you all back, in 10 minutes. So I can let people know in the room, okay, 1 minute left. And then I can still send a broadcast message to those who are online. And we all debrief together, usually using a digital whiteboard. So for everyone to be able to see the digital whiteboard, the tools will allow us to do that. But for those who are in room, they could bring their laptops with them, but you would have to let them know ahead of time. And then you have to be very clear. You have to turn off your audio and you have to mute your speakers on your devices. Otherwise, there's echoes and there can be feedback. So you just be very clear about you have to keep your audio off. But if you can project the whiteboard on the screen for those who are in room, then that's a way for everyone to also debrief and see the whiteboard. But that has worked really well for me. But I do have colleagues who actually do mix the breakout rooms. They'll mix the folks that are online with the on-site folks. So you can either send them to another room if you have those resources. You can make sure they bring their headsets, because otherwise it can get really loud in the room. And if you have a big room, you can spread them out, but say wear your headsets, and then, you can kind of control that too. So you really have to think ahead of what could happen and what could be distracting, and then what can I do to minimize that. I also like to allow my participants to choose how they will show up. You get to choose, are you going to be here online? Are you going to be here on site? And again, that's an example of what we talked about before, Tamara, about giving them agency, giving them choice. But what I've learned is you get to choose how you show up, but you commit to that. Because in the past, I had some people who said, I'll be there in person. And then day of, they actually joined online. but it helps us to plan the room. If I know I have 9 people that are going to be in the room, then I set up the room, to accommodate that. And so I try to get a balance usually, and usually naturally it will kind of happen that way. But sometimes through our learning management system, they're able to choose their venue of how they'll show up, or sometimes we'll do it more informal ways too and find out how they want to choose to show up. But that also is very helpful because the people who choose to be in the room, they want that in-room energy. They want to connect with people in room. So it allows them to get that need satisfied as well.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I love it and I got it. It's like it will be my tips for for some hybrid learning program. And now I think it's really an interesting question for me personally. Now it's 4 years after the pandemic. And of course, the businesses, they started to work back to office and back to in-person trainings. What's the trend do you see about in-person trainings, virtual trainings, hybrid learning programs? How does it work now? Because I think that many industries, they came back to in-person trainings because maybe they don't believe in virtual trainings or something like that. What do you think and what do you see in different kinds of industries? Because you work a lot with different kinds of companies all over the states, all over the world. And what's the trend? And do you see it?
Well, you're absolutely right, Tamara, that we're starting to see, we certainly saw the hybrid workplace necessitate the live mixed learning or the hybrid learning. But now there are organizations that are bringing people back or bringing people back to be in the office more often. But I see, people really did enjoy working from home, and I don't see that going away entirely. So I think, at least for a while, I would predict that we will still see virtual training, we will still see in-person training, and we will still see some hybrid learning because there still are workplaces where you maybe you're in the office 3 days a week and then you work from home a couple days a week too. So I like to look at, what are you teaching? What is the topic you're teaching? And if it is workable to teach it all virtual, do that. And if it works better to have it in person, do that. But for those really complex ones where you do have workforces who are both remote and then they're also on site, then you can consider doing that hybrid learning. But look at what you're teaching. But this is really interesting to me, Tamara. I think it was a psychological safety class. We taught it hybrid, and I think we taught it virtual, and I think we taught it in person. And I actually thought the most effective and most engaging class we had was the virtual one, which was really surprising to me because it's the topic of psychological safety.
Yes.
Right? But they were actually, I felt like that class was the most successful in terms of their participation, not measuring application yet. And then I had another really interesting example too. So we talked earlier about presentation skills. So I've taught that through all 3 venues as well. But there was this one class where I taught it for years in person, and then I taught it hybrid, but I was there on site. But then we had virtual participants, right? But very recently, I was the one that was remote, and I had one remote learner, but the rest of them were all in person. And I have to say that class, it was more effective than all of the others. And part of that class involved one-on-one coaching at the end. So what we did is we moved them, they were all doing work, they were doing prep work on presentations. We moved to a different room. So I was on a different laptop. We had a facilitator there on site to kind of help manage movement. And one-on-one, they would come and meet in the other room with me for one-on-one coaching right at the very end. And it was just private with kind of this new connection on the platform in a different room. And then we were able to all meet back in the other room. But again, I'm virtual the whole time. But I really saw that that was a very successful combination. So I would really challenge our listeners, experiment, innovate, notice what works, notice what doesn't work, and then just keep doing more of what works.
Yes, it was great experience and great examples. How does it work? Because like my next question about what themes do you think is more effective in person or in virtual?
Yeah, it depends. Like if you're doing technical training and you're actually working on things where it's more hands-on, that makes sense. You have to be hands-on. But if you're doing, let's say, some types of customer service training or training a call center or things like that, I mean, a lot of that is working with audio and you're working right remotely sometimes anyway. So I could see virtual training working very well for that. Leadership training, that I've seen that taught successfully virtually as well, but it is nice to at least have, if you can, a class, maybe the first class or the last class. Sometimes it's better the first class so you can meet people where you are all together in room, because we do know it's a different experience. The energy is different. You learn things about people that you didn't know before. I worked for years with this individual remotely. And I know, Tamara, you and your colleagues are all over the world as well. But I worked with her for years and never had met her in person. And, you feel like you know a person after years, right?
Yeah.
But I was finally able to meet her in person for the first time. I think it was last year. And when we were together, it was like starting over almost, because it is different when you're in person, the energy, right? And the feel of it, and you don't get a sense of height. When you work virtually with people, you're like, oh, you're tall. Like, you don't know that. And you have legs too. But
Yes.
what I learned about her in that meeting is that she was a go-getter, because we would say, oh, we forgot to get whatever. And she would say, oh, I'll go get that. And she'd leave the room. And she was a go-getter. And I didn't learn that until we were actually in person. So anyway, I see benefits and advantages to all sorts of venues. And really, you just think about what's the most appropriate venue based on topic and audience and experience.
Yes, and sometimes it could be blended learning programs, not just like you need to choose just like virtual or just in person. It's great and great example.
Yes.
And I remember it's absolutely true that I knew before, like maybe 2 years I knew in virtual, and just like through 2 years I've met you in person, and it was great meeting, and like great feelings, and like so warm meeting, and like we'll keep in touch, and in person, in virtual, and it's really true. Yes, because we are human.
We're human. And so, we could certainly, and I'm a virtual person, but there's nothing like, right, being in person. So when you can build that in, if you can, it's great for, everyone knows this, right? It's great for team building. It's great for building rapport. It's great for building relationships with clients or customers or colleagues. So when we can, it's great to optimize that.
But like in resume, I'm really like 100% sure that it doesn't depend from format, like in person or virtual or like hybrid or something like that. It depends on instructional design. It depends on facilitator skills. It depends on like how you engage your audience. How, like, yes, it's a mix. And if you have remote work people all over the world, like my company has, like you can do the best virtual training in the world if you have the best methodologists, like instructional designers who prepared the best virtual training. And like I'm lucky person because we have lanes and we can use the best I think so, the best platform for virtual trainings. But like it depends on you. It's like depends on your program, your instructional design.
And it makes me think of PowerPoint, right? So there's another tool, and people can maybe not use PowerPoint very effectively, right? For example, let's say they have tons and tons of words, it's all text and it's all bullets, and bullets certainly have a place, but they have their place if it's a list, like bullets work well for lists. But for other things, there are better visual, structural kinds of things, processes, diagrams, charts that might display the data more effectively. So again, it comes down to design, to your point, Tamara, about good design. So you have this tool, PowerPoint, but good design is what can make it an effective visual.
Yes, it's true. And Diana, you are the great author. And I want to talk about your author's experience. And as the author of several books and numerous articles on training and personal development, what were your source of inspiration and motivation for writing these works, and explore the inner drive or external influences that's fueled your creativity and commitment to sharing knowledge through writing? Share, please.
Wow, that's a hefty question there. Well, I am excited to say I have a new book called ATD's Handbook for Consulting. So that is available on Amazon, and it was a collaborative work. So Elaine Beek, if those of you who maybe know her works from the past in the field of learning and development, she was the main editor in this book. And then there's many contributing authors. So I was able to contribute a chapter to this book. So feel free to check that out. The one that Tamara was talking about is called Next Level Virtual Training.
Absolutely.
Advance your facilitation. Thank you. And so we're so proud. That book has won 3 awards. So we're excited to see the impact that book is having. But for me, that book was inspired because, as I mentioned, we'd been using these other platforms over the years to teach virtual training. And we didn't even call it virtual training back then. We called it web conferencing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use these different platforms to, engage staff and customers through kind of precursor virtual training. And then the pandemic hit, and I thought, we've been doing this for 2 decades. Everybody needs to know how to do this now. Like the whole world needs to know how to do this. So I submitted my book proposal like the month after the pandemic started.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was, at least for us in the States, it was about March-ish of 2020. So I submitted my proposal in April of 2020, and it got accepted with ATD Press. And then I wrote that through 2020 and 2021, and it came out in 2022. And again, the idea was to help the world learn how to do this well. And I think mainly to know that it could be done well, as you mentioned, Tamara, with all these things we've been talking about today that make a difference, like good design.
Yes. And I want to ask you about, you are really a great author, and I've read your book, Next Level Virtual Training. Yes, because I have with your signature, like, yes, in person. It's so it's so emotional for me.
Yeah.
And what was so unexpected for you when you launched your book, when you pressed her? What was maybe unexpected moment for you, or something like when you get some results, or maybe some feedback from your audience? I don't know, maybe some situation which was connect with the book. Can you share?
Well, it kind of ties back to what we talked about when you're a facilitator and you see your participants actually get that aha moment and how rewarding that is for you. It was very similar because people would email me and say, my copy of Next Level Virtual Training is dog-eared. I have so many Post-it notes stuck in the book to help me kind of find certain things. Again, that was so rewarding, right? Because that was the whole goal, is to really share knowledge, equip people, help them to know it could be done successfully. And there's just so many different skill sets, which is why I talk about a capability model in there of 8 core areas of expertise that people can use as a trajectory for professional development, right? So when you have this idea of, oh my God, where do I start? It's like, you know what? Here's some 8 core areas, 8 core capabilities that you can focus on. And if you do this and develop in these areas, you can be a very polished and professional virtual facilitator.
Oh, yes, it's true. And, I love the books where I have a lot of notes. It means, yes, it's really so valuable for me. Now I'm reading the book about manifesting, about your dreams, about your goals, about everything. And I have a lot of notes. And when I read again and again, I try to remember, okay, this way, okay, this tip or this tip. And it's really important. And when you're author, I hope one day I will be an author of my own book.
That
and
would be
yes,
awesome.
it's great. It's great when
It's
your
great.
audience, when your reader have a lot of notes in your book.
And that's the reflection too, what you were talking about, Tamara, where you're looking back over your notes, and that's that reflection, right? Which is so important for learning.
Absolutely.
Processing and digesting. And, neuroscience is telling us over and over again too, how important and essential is spaced repetition, right? So you learn something or you read something and you kind of set it aside and just about the time you're starting to forget it is when you want to pick it up again and like reinforce that and review that and then set it aside and give it space again and then come back to it again. That's how we really learn, is through that spaced repetition. So interesting to see you naturally saying that about kind of reflection as
Yes.
you read some of your favorite books.
And like, you started to talk about, I don't know why, but like I'm thinking now about like different kinds of generation, because you started to talk about repeated, like, you have your experience repeated, like think about, like go back. And I thought, oh my God, it's about my kids, how we learn together something like, okay, like, but they are different generation and they have a next question. Like maybe you see what's the difference between generation in virtual trainings and in person trainings. Like, can you share your thoughts about that too?
Well, it is really interesting, right? So we see a lot of the boomers retiring now, the baby boomers. And so Gen X obviously is kind of still out there working, and the millennials and the Gen Zs are up and coming. But the millennials, like really what you hear from them is really what's important to them is growth and development and learning, which is kind of exactly our field, right? Versus the boomers, who were very loyal and worked for an employer, whether they hated it or not. They stayed there for 40 years. But now we really see more, instead of loyalty, it's like, I want to grow, I want to develop, I want to learn. And so that's what's so exciting to be in that field, Tamara, you and your company, and I so treasure it as well. But Gen Z is really interesting, right? So they've grown up as these digital natives. And one of the things that I noticed in a class that I was observing, where they were all Gen Z, is there was an instructor there. I was really more of an observer at that class. But the instructor was mentioning this to me too. He said, these students, they will raise their hands when they run into a challenge or encounter a problem. And he said, but there were so many of them and one of him. He said, by the time I would get to each of them, they had already solved their own problem. So the Gen Z generation, they're used to being able to look on their phone immediately, find a YouTube video to answer their question, look it up to solve their problem. They are resourceful. So I think that's going to be really golden for the workforce going forward.
Yes, great, great, great. And I love it. And, I'm thinking a lot about Gen Z, but like, I think my kiddos, they are not Gen Z. They're after the
They're after Gen
It's like,
Z.
yeah,
the
because
little
my
ones.
eldest, he is
Oh, right.
like post-pandemic. My small one, he's post-pandemic person. I don't know what kind of generation is it. Like, yes, and I'm thinking a lot about their lifelong learning experience, because it's really important for me and for our family, because I'm in educational technology, and it's a lot for me. Education part, like so huge for me, and I'm thinking a lot about that.
That'll be really fun for you to see, how that generation develops. I know babies that were born during the pandemic, they were calling pandies.
Oh, pandies, yes.
But we'll see what name sticks, right?
Yes,
As the generations grow older.
Yes. And Diana, your book includes 101 actionable tips for virtual trainers. Could you highlight a few of these tips and explain their significance in improving virtual training delivery? Maybe some of your favorite, which you really love.
Sure. I feel like I've mentioned a few of them. So there are 101.
Yes.
There's a lot of them.
Maybe, yes. Like you mentioned just like 5, maybe 2, but I wanted to share more, because your book is really important for the professional facilitators, trainers, instructional designers. And I really love that you develop the industry, and I really love that we can make our learning world the best. It's why I want to share, please.
Yes. Well, I really wanted to make those tips practical. So we worked hard to make sure that they were actually prescriptive. They're actually principles. Do this. So I've talked about a few already today, like allowing learners to choose how to show up in a mixed learning environment or hybrid environment, and giving learners agency. Those are some of the tips we've already talked about today. But another one would be, this includes more almost learning experience design, which has really been influenced by many fields, some of which include design thinking and fields like that, evidence-based practices, cognitive psychology. So one is to include target learners early in your design phase. So I've been working recently on a customer service program where we found 2 individuals who would be in the class. We will be training them virtually for this one, and we're doing some in person as well, and actually ran initial design ideas by them, asking them for their feedback, because it's this collaborative experience. And I have never, ever regretted doing that. You always learn so much. And some people will say, well, that's cheating. You're asking your audience. But no, it's what we like to call feed forward, because sometimes we ask for feedback too late. It comes too late. So very early in this design process with virtual training, you ask a few key people, early designs by them, quick and dirty. So nothing is set in stone yet. Because if you've developed this whole facilitator guide, this whole training program, virtual blended program, and then you ask stakeholders for feedback, they're less reticent to actually give you feedback because it feels too finalized. It feels too polished. And so when it's, kind of quick and dirty prototype at the beginning, it's easier to poke holes in it. And in the end, have a better program.
Yes, great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I appreciate you. And I think our listeners, they will be so excited to hear it. And of course, they should read this book. And yes, I love it. Thank you so much. And finally, I have a question about what message or key takeaway do you hope readers will gain from reading Next Level Virtual Training Advance Your Facilitation?
Well, I think one of the things to think about is I really want people to realize that it can be done successfully and it can be executed smoothly. Because, you'll hear people say, oh, I still don't like virtual training or hybrid training. Never do that. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. And yes, that can happen if we don't do all of those iceberg under the water kinds of prep things we talked about, where you're practicing with the technology and doing run-throughs and even having your IT staff, nearby or on call or there for part of it when you open. There's so many things you can do to help minimize things that can be challenges, right, in those programs. But I'm here to tell you that it can be done smoothly and successfully because I've seen it multiple times. It just requires a lot of think work, careful thought work, good design, skilled facilitation, and all of these things can help make your learning successful. But Tamara, thank you so much for talking about the book. And we can let the listeners know that it is available both Amazon on Next Level Virtual Training, Advance Your Facilitation, but it's also available on our website. So they can go to our website, which is howlesassociates.com. That's HOWLES associates.com.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. And I have always with my guests, I have a personal questions with really, really important for me too. And for my audience, I hope so, because I want to more deeply my guests, because all my guests are unique for me. And what events or inspiring moments in your life led you to a career in training and development in virtual trainings like this?
Yeah, I think, my father was a real lover of learning, and he kind of instilled that, at least in my brother and I. My older sister, not so much, but well, maybe she would argue that. But my brother and I, we have always just loved learning. So I think that was part of it, right? Because you look at the field of L&D or talent development, and right, that's a huge part of it. The other part for me, I think, was I loved business. I used to play business when I was a little girl. You would think you would play something else, but I would play insurance company or, so I was always fascinated with business. Well, you put those two together, where can you have kind of ongoing learning in a business context? And that really is talent development, training and L&D. And so that's kind of how I found my way into the field.
Oh my God, yes. And it's so great that you have, right? Your dad is alive?
Oh, he
No.
did pass away over a decade ago.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. But it's so great that our parents can be like,
Yeah, that
our
legacy.
great teachers. Like, yeah.
Yes.
And you told that you loved with your brother some kind of learning. What kind of learning did you like in your childhood? Like, what's your memorable moments in your some learning processes which you really love and you remember about that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember enjoying history. I always like English, like writing and reading. And I was always interested kind of in technology too. And my brother too, because now he's in AI. So he works in artificial intelligence, which is also
Wow.
really changing the field. It's changing everything, but also
Yeah.
the L&D area. So yeah, I was always, we all have these kind of areas that we're attracted to. And I think it's like listening to your gut and finding out what makes you sing, what makes you soar, and then just really growing in that area if you can.
Yes. And what childhood memories have had the greatest impact on your drive for success in both your career and personal life?
Again, I would think it would be probably my father because he kind of loved learning and he was really interested in speaking as well. And he did a lot of public speaking himself. So I remember being brought along and watching him from the audience. So I think that influenced my interest in presentation skills and presenting as well. And he would even take me to hear speakers. I remember we once, just him and I, went to kind of this huge convention center and there were multiple speakers. And I think the last one to speak was Zig Ziglar. And, he was really skilled and very effective and even got down on his knees on the stage at one point when it was like a really, very important moment or point.
Yes.
And then my dad would talk to me about that later. So, I think a lot of different experiences can influence us, but our parents and guardians can certainly play a role in that. And for me, yeah, it was definitely my father.
Yes, great. How do you like to spend time with your family, with your siblings, with your daughter, with your like husband? Like what's your favorite moments which you have together?
Yeah, I think what's fun for me, and I know Tamara, you enjoy this too, is traveling. So, like, we like to explore new places and we're foodies. Like, we
Yes.
love good food and we love trying good food and new food. So, we went to Montreal and we found this great bakery in Canada. And, it's just fun. It's the new foods are fun, the new sights are fun. And I think that's what we enjoy together.
Yes. What kind of food your favorite?
Well, I do love Indian food. And so chicken tikka masala is something I order a lot.
I love it too. I love it
You
too,
too?
like with rice. And like,
Yeah,
Indian rice is I think the
it's
best in the
delicious.
world. Like,
Right. It's
yes, I don't
delicious.
know. Like, yes,
Yeah.
so delicious and like tikka masala and like, yes, chicken. Like, I love it. It's really my favorite too. Oh my God. Yes, I want to eat, at the end of the
It
day
makes
and
us hungry.
I'm
Now,
hungry. Yes.
now your listeners are hungry too.
Maybe. Yes. And what qualities do you value in your partner and maybe your friends? And how do they reflect in your approach to like teamwork and collaboration in the workplace and like everywhere?
I think part of it too is just really building relationships, right? And a lot of that is based on trust. And you build trust over time and through being authentic, being honest, being forthright, having those hard conversations sometimes that we dread. But once you do it
Mm-hmm.
and you listen carefully and allow everyone the opportunity to speak, right? Then you come out of that stronger. So, I think really being in relationship with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and part of relationship is kind of ups and downs. So being able to weather all of that and then keep moving forward.
Yes, yes. I love it. And I appreciate that you share it with me too. And like, in the end of my podcast, I always ask the same three questions for
Oh,
everyone.
oh,
Yes.
cool.
And first of all, it's like about what was the last thing you asked ChatGPT?
I can tell you the first thing I asked ChatGPT.
Yeah, okay.
I actually think both are travel related. So the first thing I ever asked ChatGPT, because it came out like November 2022, right?
Yes.
I was planning a summer trip, I think. Yes. So it might have been like it may have been January 2023. I was planning a trip to the Upper Peninsula in the States. So kind of up by Michigan area. And so I put in there, what would you recommend for like cities and things to do? And so ChatGPT gave me this whole itinerary of what to do in the UP, where to hike, and what to do on the different Great Lakes, right, to go kayaking.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of used it as kind of a travel agent. And then recently doing the same thing, because we're thinking about traveling to a city in the East Coast. So I was like, what are some great visitor spots to check out? So it's been a travel agent for us, but we love to use it for writing too. Doing a good first draft of something. Of
Yes.
course, you go in and edit it, but it saves a lot of efficiency by it kicking out a draft for you.
Yes, great. And tell your favorite song, like maybe some lyrics from the song, and explain why exactly you choose it.
Well, I do like Shivers by Ed Sheeran. And, I just appreciate the artistry of him writing about, his wife when she was diagnosed with cancer. And then when he was first meeting her and wasn't
Wow.
yet married, and then his children. And then when his mom passed away, he's like using all these life events to allow inspiration to write a song. And the Shiver song is like, it's so full of like, to me, dance music. So it's a way to like get me pumped up and excited. I want to like move when I hear this song. But I also appreciate just the songwriting part of his artistry.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. And can you play some instrument, like maybe piano or like some kind of instrument? Can you play?
I did play violin. I don't play violin anymore, but I grew up in a family of violinists. So my mother played professionally. She made us all learn violin. So my sister,
Wow.
myself, my brother, even my father tried to learn a few songs so that we could all play violin together a few times. So I was classically trained. A lot of Vivaldi is what we grew up playing. My sister now plays in a fiddle band, though she's a
Wow.
bluegrass band. She plays fiddle. But we all grew up being more classically, trained. But I really don't play violin anymore. But I did go to Carnegie Hall. So my sister played in an orchestra that needed more violinists, and so I auditioned, and I was able to go with her, and we played in Carnegie Hall in New York City, and that was quite
Wow.
the experience. Yeah, because they told us, they're like, don't move before we went on stage. They told the whole orchestra, don't touch the music stands. And we're like, why? And they're like, because if it'll make a noise and it'll echo all over,
Mhm.
the hall, because the acoustics are so good. And so they're like, just don't touch any music stands. So we were very careful not to do that. But yeah, that was a great
Wow.
experience.
Wow. Yes, it's great experience, and maybe I feel something. I didn't know about your story with violence and like about your family with that. Yes, and it's
Yeah.
so great, so great. And like in the end of my podcast, asks the next guest on my podcast. Here's how it goes. Every guest gets to throw a question at the next guest.
Oh,
And
wow.
yes, and I believe it adds a unique touch, allowing the previous guest to pose a question to the next one. Last week, Phyllis Banner was my wonderful guest, and she passed on her question to you. Are you ready to answer?
Yes, I'm ready.
Yes, great. Here is it.
How do you define engagement, and why are you even using that word? Because I can't imagine how we can define it. So, how are you defining engagement? Why are we using the word engagement? And what other word would you use instead of engagement that captures what you're trying to capture?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I feel like I think I'm going to say this because I say that hybrid is overused. Engagement is overused. And it's been the hot word for a couple years now in our field of virtual training, engagement. And, your guest is right. What is that? So I would say, to me, it's when a virtual participant, and hopefully our listeners have experienced this, you are sitting on the edge of your seat because you are listening to every word and you can't wait to participate. And you have a comment and you're thinking of a thought and you have a challenge and you have an idea and you have a question and you want to put something in the post. And wait a minute, let's go in and work together on this next project in our breakout group. Like, that's engagement. So to me, I think it's active, attentive, focused participation.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And it's your turn. I suggest asking you a question for my next guest.
Okay, the question I would ask is, what is a trend that you see coming down the pike in the field of learning and development?
Yes, great. I love it. And I will ask my next guest. We'll see. Diana, thank you for gracing us with your presence today. It has been an honor to host you. Your insights have been nothing short of inspiring, and I'm profoundly grateful for the wealth of knowledge and wisdom you've shared. I'm confident that our conversation has left a lasting impression, enriching and empowering all who have tuned in. Initiating something meaningful about this subject, virtual learning and training, brings me a warm, pleasant feeling. Once again, thank you for all the listeners for being an integral part of our podcast community. Stay tuned for more captivating episodes filled with enriching conversations and narratives that ignite inspirations. Until we reconvene, take care, stay curious, and continue to shine brightly. Bye!